Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be looking at the automatic pilot in the non-G1000 version of the Cessna 172. Now this is a pretty neat autopilot because it's a little bit more old-fashioned than the one we see over in the G1000, but believe it or not, there's quite a few functions on it that work really, really well. So what I'm going to do first is we're going to do this entire flight with the autopilot today, just to make things kind of exciting for us. Looks like our barometric pressure is correctly set. So one thing you got to watch out for in this particular unit is there's a couple quirks, and we'll point them out as we fly along. One of my favorite quirks on it is the fact that if you just mash the button to go ahead and activate the autopilot, the plane will immediately level itself off. So you're going to have to kind of watch out for that because it will trap you up. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and set my heading bug so it is pointing directly in the direction that we're taking off from here. This is going to make it a little bit easier to climb. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and dial in my selected altitude. We're going to do 2,500 feet. Check everything else to make sure it's good and make sure that everything works pretty good. This big red button, by the way, it's one of those where it's like you never bind it on a keyboard. Make sure you have that bound somewhere in case there's an emergency. Keep in mind, in the simulator, you can actually pull through the autopilot like you can in the real world. So at least we got that going for us. All right, let's go ahead and take off. So I just love how when I started this whole thing up here and I said, all right, it's real live weather. Go ahead and get me set up on the runway. And of course, Microsoft puts me in the incorrect runway for this particular takeoff. So shame, shame, shame. But again, they're going to use whatever priority runway. It just means it's going to be a little bumpy on the way out. Of course, the weather recently in the real world has been interesting to say the least. 55 knots, it's our rotation speed. Give it a couple blasts of trim. Okay, so the first mistake everybody makes is they press the autopilot button. The moment you mash that button, this plane will immediately do a nosedive because there's no default vertical speed loaded into the actual simulator itself. So that's one thing you have to watch out for immediately. So if you're going to go down here and go bang, and press autopilot, the plane will go funk like this on you, which is not probably desirable when you're at low altitudes. So my first recommendation for this autopilot is get yourself a little bit of room before you start getting a little bit silly here. So I'm going to climb just a little tiny bit. We're going to go ahead and ignore them. And you are now ignored. Whoop. Don't ignore the real controllers, by the way. They do not care for that for some reason.
Tower red 75. Continue.
All right, let's get to it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press the AP button. And as soon as I do that, it's going to ask for my vertical speed. So I'm going to press AP. We're going to up, and I set this to 700. Good. So now what I've done is it basically said, hey, don't kill us. And I've asked for 700 feet per minute with a target altitude of 2,500. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip on the heading mode, which simply says follow the heading I have selected. And now I'm just going to select the new heading. I'm going to go ahead and point us basically right behind us. Bring it all the way around there, and we're going to start making our way directly towards the north. Again, I'm not going to touch the controls for the entire flight if I don't need to. Get this thing spinning around pretty aggressively. There's a really cool church down there in the real world. I wonder what this guy's doing. You know, I never think of using this flight simulator to like spy on my neighbors and like see who has pools and stuff like that. But one of these days I gotta start doing that just because I'm mean. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and spin around. Note, because we have selected an altitude, we are going to start climbing towards that altitude. Now, some of you are probably saying, hey, wait a minute, I want to adjust my vertical speed. Maybe the aircraft's starting to get a little on the slow side. Oh, we can do that. So what we're gonna do is, this is very unintuitive, but you press the altitude button. And notice, as soon as you do that, it locks your altitude out. So what we want to do really is pick the altitude we want to climb to, press the altitude button, then now desire your particular vertical speed. See how that's a little bit different? A lot of the ones that we normally work with are going to have a vertical speed separate. But the way this one works is you cannot change the vertical speed unless you are at the altitude that you're already locked at. Notice we have VS is now selected on here. So what I'm going to do now is switch over to nav hold, which is basically going to take whatever source of navigational data, in this case the GPS, and then feed it into our roll computer. So I'm going to press the nav button. So now what's going to happen is our whole aircraft is going to rotate, and it's going to start feeding roll in commands, which is again left, right, into our particular autopilot based on whatever we have selected. So in this case GPS, we have ourselves this nice magenta line of safety, and now we are on our way. It's going to take the world's sharpest corner. Remember, because of the new world update, we have this new thing called time climb. If this causes issues for it, we can actually fight it. So in this case, what I'm actually going to do is override it. We're going to go ahead and press the direct to, and we're simply going to select the airport that we intended to travel to. Come down here, press activate. And now notice it got rid of that time climb business. So now if we wanted to, we could come back here and we could slap this back into navigation mode. So now that we're back in nav mode, the aircraft is going to complete its turn, and now we're going to fly back towards our target automatically. This is just a brand new quirk that has been introduced. It is something you're going to have to watch out for if you build your flight plans using Flight Simulator's built-in stuff. If you build the flight plans externally and then you import it, or you sit here and dial each one of those waypoints directly into the computer directly, you're not going to have that little issue, but it's something you're going to have to watch out for. Don't be confused when it happens to you for the 40th time. So we're almost up to our altitude of 2,500 feet. And like I said, this is a very, very short flight. So now we're going to take a look at the other options that we have. The first one's going to be the heading hold. We've already seen what that does. Basically, you set the heading right here that you'd like the aircraft to follow. Press the heading hold button, and it will automatically track that heading. Now, there's something I got to watch out for here is the fact that heading is not the same thing as track. So what will happen is air traffic control will say turn right heading 090, which is basically east. But the problem is, let's say a wind coming out of the north. So even though you're pointing the airplane at east, the aircraft physically is not traveling east. So if you run into that situation, one of the ways you can avoid that is if you look over on your GPS real quick, at the top center, you're going to see this is the word track. If this track says 090, it doesn't matter what this says. This is the actual number air traffic control is asking you to follow, not the one you see on your directional gyro. Speaking of which, make sure you reset your directional gyro every once in a while. All right, we're on our way. We got about 5 minutes to go. Well, let's take a look at some of the other functionality here. So what we want to do is, let's say we want to do an ILS approach. We'll go ahead and do my favorite, which is runway 6. Runway 6 at Bradley is this big flashy one right here. So let's say we want to head roughly in this direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's say we get a call from air traffic control and they say turn left heading 300. So we go ahead and bang this thing all the way to 300. We'll come down here, we'll mash the heading button, and now the aircraft will start tracking over in that direction. Again, at no point have I actually touched the controls. I'm going to reduce RPM here so I get a little fast. There you go, 2,600. That is a maximum performance cruise in this plane for sure. So we're going to swing around this way, and then they start saying, I expect the vectors, ILS, runway 6. So we say, okay, we'll get ready for that. We come over to our handy-dandy GPS. We select our approach. We'll go ahead and grab it. Come over to this one. Oh, I have to select the approach before we can activate the approach. Sigh. We'll say that one's good. We're going to go ahead and activate that approach. Notice nothing happens because we are on heading hold mode. So one of the tricks here with this particular GPS is flip it to heading hold mode so that you have yourself a situation where when you change what's going on here, it will not affect the rest of the performance of the aircraft. So now let's say we want to fly that ILS. Whoops, somebody accidentally typed in 75. This is my friend's airplane, not my airplane. All right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to go dial in the frequency just like we would normally do. Come over here, we'll do a 11110, which is going to be the approach. Press this one, and now I'm going to swap sources. So you see how this thing did a little dance? Also notice it still says GPS here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press CDI, which now means our roll program, if we were to mash the nav button, is going to be led by whatever the particular ILS frequency is. So you can see right now that we're just a little bit low of the glide slope, and we're just a little bit to the right of where the localizer actually is positioned. Now, one of the nice things about the GPS here, if I zoom out just a tiny bit here, is you can actually see very clearly where all of our waypoints are actually going to be. If we came to the left just a tiny bit more, we could actually go ahead and take ourselves right to Penna. So I'm actually going to go ahead and take myself just a tiny bit to the left here. Again, we're just going to take a couple degrees, maybe 5 degrees, and you can immediately see how we start to swing this way. So let's say now that we get a call from air traffic control and they ask us to descend to 2,000 feet. Let's go ahead and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and select my altitude first, press the Alt button, select my vertical speed, and down we go. Now let's say they call us back and say, climb up to 3,000 feet. So you're sitting there going, oh no, what do I do? Well, all you have to do is swing this thing up to the altitude you're currently at. The aircraft will immediately level off, select the new altitude that you want to travel to, press the Alt button, and simply select your new vertical speed. So now we're going to start climbing upwards towards 3,000 feet. Remember, at any time, I can abort this by pressing the Alt button. We'll just come back up to 2,500 here. Let's take a good look at Rainbow Reservoir there. And we're right about to 2,500. Now go ahead and mash the Alt key, which will immediately override our selected altitude and lock in the new altitude. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the approach autopilot. So let's go ahead and take a look at our situation here. We need to come a little bit more north. I'm going to go ahead and, since we're still in heading hold mode, I'm going to swing around to 330. 330 should get us more or less exactly square with that particular position. And then we'll switch on the autopilot for approach. All right, we've hit it. So now we're going to go ahead and flip on the approach autopilots. Now, one thing you got to watch out with the approach autopilot is if you approach at too tight of an angle like we just did there, you will not be able to capture the approach easily. So in this particular case, we've actually blown right through the approach, and this is one of the faults of my own self. We're trying to approach this at a 90-degree angle. But, again, we're pretty talented pilots here. This isn't too difficult to correct my little boo-boo here. So one of the things we're going to do is you can see the big flashy happy runway down there, is we're just going to go ahead and adjust so we're hitting that at a slightly less crazy 90-degree angle. Go ahead and hold the nose up a little bit. I'm going to re-engage the automatic pilot. Remember, it was told to 2,500 feet, so it's going to automatically recapture it. Now, notice our glide slope is captured. I'm going to press the approach button here. It's going to be looking for the glide slope, but it will not capture the glide slope until we also get the localizer. So in this particular case, we're never actually going to do it. And you can see the glide slope is now blasting past us. So what we can do is we can come in here, we can manually order up the descent. So I'm going to press the Alt key. I'm going to go ahead and give ourselves about 700 feet per minute. Should be pretty good here. Now notice the localizer is starting to swing this way to the left. But because we have armed the approach automatically, what the aircraft will actually do is it'll latch onto it, and you're going to see the thing switches to approach once we've grabbed it. So you can see we're hitting it just a moment. This should switch from the word arm, and it'll go ahead and grab it. Come on. Come on. Make sure you're on the correct frequencies as well. Looks like it does not want to grab that particular approach because we've ripped right by it as well. So let's play with that for a second. There we go. Just required just a little bit of finagling on our part to try to recapture that approach. In this particular case, what had happened, and this is a warning for you, this is definitely a bug report, was the fact that because, if you remember a little earlier, I switched my CDI to VLOC, it refused to capture it until I hit the point where I went ahead and grabbed that other one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly give ourselves a little bit of vertical speed here. And we're going to go ahead and recapture our particular position here. There it goes. Good. So what had happened is I had to cycle my nav option here. Again, this was playing with the CDI button in order for it to actually recognize the fact that we're on the correct freak here. So one thing we've done, of course, in this effort to go ahead and recapture aircraft, and again, this is definitely not good. This is not supposed to do it this way. It should grab it right away, is the fact that we don't actually have glide slope information until we intercept it. So in this case, if you come down here, you'll notice the word APR was replaced with ARM APR, and now it's just regular APR. But you can still see that GS is still selected, meaning it's waiting to capture the glide slope. We're not going to capture the glide slope until this line right here is basically going to hit the middle. But you can see right now that we're just ever so slightly off. Okay, here comes the glide slope. So what's going to happen now is this is going to go ahead and grab onto it in just a moment. Right when it crosses smack dab here in the middle, it should latch right onto that sucker. Ready? Don't touch anything. Don't forget to put your flaps down, by the way. And watch this. It's going to switch from GS to GS. Arm, GS arm to GS. Ready? There it is. Ha-ha! Hey, something went according to plan. I'm going to go ahead and dump down the rest of my flaps. Again, I have not touched my controls at this time. So now, again, this aircraft is completely unautomatic. Now, some of you are probably saying, is approach mean the same thing as automatic landing? And believe it or not, they are not the same thing. So one of the mistakes I've seen people make before is try to use the approach hold as a way to basically put the plane down on the ground. It's not to say that in a simulator you can't, but in the real world, we'd strike that prop on the ground so hard, they'd be picking up the pieces for weeks. It'd be pretty darn messy. So I'm going to enjoy the ride down because, again, I'm still an automatic pilot here. Again, cycle this button before you go onto approach. This will bust it on you. So, again, I want you to make sure you know that before you run into this. And keep in mind, if you fly the GPS all the way down the approach, the GPS will automatically switch to VLOC mode for you. I'm just giving you a warning now because it gave me a pretty good surprise that it was a little different than when we tested it earlier, because when we tested it earlier, we let the GPS fly most of the approach and switch over to ILS at the last possible second. So again, be very cautious of that. If it doesn't capture when you do nav or APR, you've got to cycle this button real quickly. Anyway, let's go ahead and put this plane down on the ground. I'm looking at this way. Apparently somebody decided to build their house on the airport, but that's their choice. So, interesting. Take a peek over here. What do we have at the Air National Guard base today? Looks like nothing too crazy. Looks like somebody decided to park a bunch of GA there. Interesting. This is the FBO, by the way, at Bradley, in case you're curious. There's our runway right there. We're getting the middle marker. That means we should be looking out the window and checking to make sure everything's okay. In just a moment, we're going to fly over the big old inner marker, and it's going to start beeping right there. Right, ready, set, beep, beep, beep. There it is. I win. Look out the window, landing. All right. So hopefully this video is helpful as far as seeing how the autopilot goes and watching out for Flight Simulator's little quirks there. Some of those things will bite you, so make sure you've had a little bit of practice with it before you attempt flying it online. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in kind of a nasty spot, so you want to be careful. Other than that, enjoy. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering what this button right here does, the reverse button, all that does is it tells the aircraft to do whatever it's doing in roll in reverse. So if we wanted to select this airport and take back off from it, for example, and we flipped on reverse mode, it would actually fly the ILS backwards. This is a super powerful tool if you want to do like a circling approach to airports where you don't have the ability to approach them directly. Now enjoy.